Most home gardeners pull garlic bulbs barely bigger than a marble every July, then wonder what they did wrong. Meanwhile, Amish farmers in Lancaster County harvest bulbs the size of a closed fist, cloves so large that two of them season an entire pot of soup. The heirloom variety secret: most grocery store garlic, and even most seed catalog garlic, comes from soft-neck varieties bred for shipping and life, not size. Amish growers in Holmes County, Ohio, have saved hardneck varieties like German Extra Hardy and Music for generations, strains that produce fewer but dramatically larger cloves. A 2019 Cornell University trial comparing hardneck and softneck yields found hardneck bulbs averaged nearly 40% larger diameter. Buying a $12 bag of true heirloom seed garlic once beat spending $6 every July on bulbs that never would grow past golf ball size. The fall planting window. Let me ask you something. What if the size of your garlic was decided back in October, months before you ever saw a sprout? Amish farmers across Pennsylvania plant garlic 6 weeks before the ground freezes solid, giving roots time to establish without pushing top growth. Most home gardeners plant too late, in November or even spring, and the bulb never gets that critical root development window. Penn State Extension research from 2018 found garlic planted in the proper fall window outproduced spring-planted garlic by nearly double. The plant spends winter building a foundation most people skip entirely. The deep bed preparation method. Amish gardeners in Lancaster County don't just stick cloves into existing dirt. They double dig beds 12 to 14 inches deep, the way their grandparents did in the 1800s. Working aged manure and compost down into the lower soil layer, not just the surface inch most people till. Garlic bulbs expand sideways and downward as they mature, and compacted clay or rocky subsoil physically stops that expansion no matter how much fertilizer gets added later. A University of Wisconsin soil compaction study from 2019 measured bulb circumference dropping by over 30% in compacted beds compared to loosened ones. Most home gardeners simply turn over the top few inches with a trowel and call it done, never realizing the bulb is hitting a hard wall of undisturbed soil just below where the roots reach. The Amish approach costs nothing but a weekend of labor, while commercial raised bed soil runs $8 to $10 per bag for the same square footage. The wide spacing rule: walk through a typical backyard garlic patch, and you'll find cloves crammed 4 or 5 inches apart, all competing for the same patch of soil. Amish growers space cloves a full 8 inches apart in rows spaced 12 inches, giving each bulb room to push outward without fighting its neighbor for nutrients and water. This habit traces back to Indiana Amish settlements in the early 1900s, where garden space was precious, and farmers learned that fewer, larger plants fed a family better than a crowded row of small ones. Crowding doesn't just limit size, it also raises humidity between plants, which increases the risk of white rot and other fungal disease that can wipe out an entire row before harvest. An Ohio State University spacing trial, published in 2020, found that doubling clove spacing increased average bulb weight by roughly 25%, with no additional fertilizer or water. Most gardeners assume tighter spacing simply means more garlic per bed, but the trial found the opposite once total harvest weight was measured, since smaller, undersized bulbs from crowded rows barely outweighed fewer, much larger bulbs from properly spaced ones. The fix costs nothing except planting fewer cloves per row and resisting the urge to pack the bed tight. The heavy straw mulch layer. Now here's what makes this even more effective than spacing alone. A heavy 4 to 6 inch layer of straw mulch laid down right after fall planting. Amish farmers in Wisconsin have used this method since the 1800s, originally just to keep garden beds from freezing solid in brutal Midwest winters. But the mulch does something else most gardeners never realize. It keeps soil temperature and moisture steady through the freeze-thaw cycles of late winter and early spring, the exact period when garlic roots are most vulnerable to damage. Bare soil heaves and cracks as it freezes and thaws repeatedly, snapping young roots and stunting bulb development before the plant even breaks ground. A straw layer also smothers spring weeds that would otherwise compete for nutrients during the critical bulb sizing window in May and June. Commercial weed fabric and frost blankets can run $30 or more for a small bed, while straw mulch from a local farm typically costs under $5 for the same coverage, and it breaks down into the soil by harvest time. The nitrogen cutoff timing. Most gardeners feed garlic the same way they feed everything else in the garden, a steady dose of fertilizer right up until harvest. Amish farmers do the opposite. and the timing is precise. Nitrogen-rich compost or manure tea gets applied in early spring when leaves are forming, because leaf growth directly determines how much energy the plant can eventually store in the bulb. But by late May, feeding stops completely. Continuing nitrogen into June pushes the plant to keep growing green top growth, instead of redirecting that energy into bulb expansion, which is the opposite of what produces a large harvest. This practice was documented among Amish farming communities in Lancaster County, going back to the early 1900s, passed down as part of seasonal garden routines long before modern soil science explained why it worked. A Michigan State University fertility trial from 2018 confirmed the mechanism, finding that garlic-fed nitrogen past the early bulbing stage produced significantly smaller bulbs than garlic, where nitrogen was cut off 6 weeks before harvest. Store-bought slow-release fertilizers marketed for garlic often ignore this timing completely, costing gardeners $10 to $15 a season for a product that can actually work against bulb size if applied too late, since most packaging only lists a generic application schedule with no mention of cutting off nitrogen before bulbing begins. The scape removal trick for the word. Let me ask you something most people never consider. What happens to a garlic plant's energy when you let it flower? Hardneck garlic sends up a curling flower stalk called a scape in early summer, and most home gardeners leave it alone, assuming it's just part of the plant's natural growth. Amish farmers cut every single scape the moment it curls, usually in mid-June, and they've done this for generations across Ohio and Indiana settlements. The reasoning is simple once you see it. That flower stalk is designed by the plant to produce seed, and producing seed takes a tremendous amount of stored energy, energy that would otherwise go straight into bulb growth underground. Leaving scapes intact essentially asks the plant to do two jobs at once, and the bulb always loses out. A University of Minnesota trial measured this directly in 2019, comparing scaped and unscaped garlic plots, and found bulbs from scaped plants averaged nearly 25% heavier at harvest. The trick costs nothing but a few minutes with scissors or shears, and the scapes themselves aren't wasted. Amish kitchens have used them for generations in scape pesto and pickled scapes. An extra harvest most people throw in the compost bin, without ever realizing it was the secret to a bigger bulb all along. The pre-harvest drought method. For most of the growing season, garlic needs consistent moisture, roughly an inch of water a week, to push steady leaf and bulb growth. But Amish farmers know something most home gardeners get backwards completely. Watering needs to stop, not increase, in the final 2 to 3 weeks before harvest. Around early July in most regions, when the bottom leaves start yellowing, Amish growers across Pennsylvania and Ohio cut irrigation entirely and let the soil dry out on purpose. This isn't neglect, it's a deliberate final step. Continued watering this late keeps the bulb wrappers soft and the cloves swollen with water weight rather than dense, storable starch and sugar, and it dramatically increases the risk of the bulb splitting open underground or rotting in storage within weeks of harvest. This dry-down practice traces back to root cellar storage traditions from the 1800s, when a split or soft bulb meant lost food for the entire winter, not just a minor inconvenience. A 2020 study out of Oregon State University's horticulture department compared garlic harvested after a dry-down period versus garlic kept consistently irrigated until harvest, and found the dry-down bulbs not only measured larger, but stored nearly twice as long in cool, dark conditions without sprouting or softening. Most home gardeners do the opposite instinctively, watering more as the weather heats up in July, right when the plant actually needs the stress of dry soil to finish bulking up. They see yellowing leaves and assume the plant is thirsty and stressed, when in reality that yellowing is the plant's own signal that it has shifted into its final bulking phase, and no longer wants wet feet. The fix costs nothing. It simply means turning the hose off 2 to 3 weeks earlier than feels natural. The seed stock selection system. Let me ask you something. What if the garlic you plant every fall is the actual reason your bulbs never get bigger? No matter what else you do, right? Most gardeners buy a bag of seed garlic once, plant it, and then save random leftover cloves from each harvest to replant the following fall, including the small ones nobody wanted to eat. Amish farming families have done the exact opposite for generations, a practice that goes back to garden seed-saving traditions common across Pennsylvania Dutch settlements in the 1700s and 1800s, long before commercial seed companies existed at all. Every single year, only the largest, healthiest bulbs from the harvest get set aside as next year's seed stock. The biggest cloves from the biggest bulbs go back in the ground, while the smaller ones get eaten or sold. Over several growing seasons, this creates a kind of selective breeding happening right in the garden bed, where the plant's genetics gradually shift toward producing larger and larger bulbs adapted specifically to that exact soil and climate. A seed-saving trial published by Iowa State University in 2018 tracked garlic bulb size across 4 consecutive seasons of large bulb selection and found average bulb weight increased by over 35% by the fourth year alone, with zero changes to fertilizer or watering. Buying fresh seed garlic every year costs $10 to $15 annually and resets this process to zero, since commercial seed stock is typically grown for uniform appearance and shelf life rather than maximum size. Saving your biggest bulbs costs nothing and compounds. The same garden literally getting better year after year, with each generation of cloves slightly better adapted to your exact patch of soil than the last. The curing room's secret. All 9 of these methods can produce a genuinely large bulb at harvest, but Amish farmers know the work isn't finished the moment garlic comes out of the ground. What happens in the 3 to 4 weeks immediately after harvest determines whether that big bulb actually stores well, tastes strong, and stays firm all winter, or shrivels and softens within a month. Amish farms across Wisconsin and Indiana hang freshly pulled garlic in bundles from barn rafters in a dark space with good airflow and steady temperatures, a curing method documented in Amish farm journals dating back to the 1800s. The garlic is never washed, never exposed to direct sun, and never cured in a damp basement or a hot enclosed shed. 3 mistakes that account for most home garlic spoiling within weeks of harvest. During this curing period, the outer wrapper leaves dry down and tighten around the bulb, sealing in moisture and concentrating the sugars that give cured garlic its sharp, storable flavor, compared to the mild, almost bland taste of garlic eaten fresh from the ground. A Cornell University post-harvest storage study from 2019 found properly cured garlic retain firmness and flavor for up to 9 months, compared to roughly 6 weeks for garlic that wasn't cured at all before storage. Most home gardeners skip this step entirely, tossing fresh bulbs straight into a kitchen basket or a plastic bag in the fridge, and wonder weeks later why half the harvest has gone soft, sprouted, or developed mold at the base. The fix costs nothing but patience and a dry corner of a garage or shed, 3 to 4 weeks of hanging time, standing between a good harvest and one that actually lasts the winter. 10 habits, 200 years of trial and error, and the difference between marble-sized garlic and bulbs the size of your fist. Variety selection, fall planting timing, deep bed preparation, proper spacing, heavy mulch, nitrogen cutoff, scape removal, a deliberate dry down before harvest, saving your own seed stock year after year, and a proper curing period once the bulbs come out of the ground. None of it requires expensive equipment or a single trip to a garden center. It requires patience, and the kind of attention Amish farming families have passed down since their ancestors first settled Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and Wisconsin generations ago. So, here's the real question. Which of these 10 habits is the one you've never tried? Drop a comment below and let us know. And while you're there, pick your team. Team Bigger Bulbs if you're trying these methods this fall, or Team Still Learning if you're just getting started with garlic. If this video helped you understand why your garlic keeps coming up small, subscribe to the Amish Life for more of these forgotten methods, and share this with someone who complains about their garlic every single summer. They'll thank you come next July.